Can you believe it? We're already 1/3 through the first season of The Last of Us, and this third episode definitely deviated away from the game. And for those of you who have played the game, you might be a bit upset not to see those interactions between Ellie and Bill, but with adaptations like this, you have to take sacrifices, and with this it's a win and lose situation. We may have lost that, but we have won in terms of what we got in return. This episode, compared to the first 2 episodes, does not start with a cold opening and flashback sequence which shows more of this world, but what we have with this episode is basically a big old flashback anyway. As this episode is dominated by Bill and Frank's love story, with it being bookended by a bit more of Joel and Ellie's progression. And I finally got that line right because I kept saying Bill and Ted by accident, bloody Bill and Ted. The episode though does start with Joel and Ellie, and we see Joel go to one of his places where he's left some supplies, and we see Ellie go downstairs to see a infected under some rubble, and she goes over to knife the infected as well, again showing Ellie's violent nature, which has been something they've sort of focused on quite a bit in these first few episodes, and I'm sort of wondering to see how they do go through this in terms of the show, because it is quite different from the game in that sense. There's also a great moment in this scene when Ellie asks Joel, is there anything bad in here? And Joel responds with, just you.
Is there anything bad in here?
Just you.
Ah, getting funnier.
Joel gets Ellie up to speed with how things went down, and also just confirmed that flour was one of the reasons why the infection spread so quickly. And I don't know about you, but I think I would have been infected pretty quickly in this world because I do like my carbs.
Oh man, I love the cake!
As they're walking, they come across a plane wreckage, and Joel explains to Ellie that when it all happened, that soldiers would go to the countryside to escort people to QZs, and if there's enough space, they'll get in, but if there's not, then that would be it for them. And Ellie also imagines what it'd be like to be up in the sky and be in a plane, and again it reminds us that all this stuff is very alien to Ellie, and so it's quite good at the end of the episode where we see her in a car and she thinks it's like a spaceship. But before we get to that part of the episode, we have the whole Bill and Frank portion, and it starts in 2003 as we see Bill in his house in his underground hideout looking at his cameras and seeing people get escorted away, and then he goes out his front door and sees that everyone's gone. And for the next 4 years, Bill is on his own, eating dinner, setting up traps, but one day he sees that there's someone in his trap, and that is Frank. And after a bit of interrogation, he comes inside Bill's house to have a shower, have some dinner, play the piano, and even get Bill to play the piano and also sing, and while they're doing that, they kiss. And hats off to Nick Offerman and Murray Bartlett for playing their respective characters, because these two, even if it's not an end of the world situation, these two felt like they were meant to be with each other. And even with their first time together in bed, you can see that Bill is very much more of an introvert and Frank is more of an extrovert, but they complement each other so well. In the following scene, we see them arguing outside of the house, and again this is another good example of seeing how different Bill and Frank are, because Bill is more focused on survival, whereas Frank, he wants to survive, but he also wants to live at the same time. Frank wants them to connect and trade with others, and so next we see them having lunch with Joel and Tess. And I thought this was great, to see these two pairs interact. Bill and Joel are connecting, Frank and Tess are as well. And with Tess in particular, a character who is there and gone very quickly in the story, to get this extra layer added to her, I thought was awesome as well. What comes after is one of my favourite scenes from the episode, and that's where we find out that Frank has swapped one of Bill's guns, one of his small guns, for some strawberry seeds. And for Frank to swap something which takes life out of this world for something which brings new life into it really does show that there's hope going forward. And there was just such a lovely scene with this couple, and we had that line from Bill as well where he says, I was never afraid before you showed up, and it's just such a pure scene and pure moment. As we go on into the night, raiders attack and set off some traps, and so Bill goes outside, and for some reason he plays like me in the game and stands directly in the open, so there's no doubt he's going to get shot, and he does get shot. Bill is looking pretty worse for wear, but then we jump forward 10 years and see that someone's in a wheelchair, and you assume it might be Bill, but it's actually Frank. Frank has a disease and he's now in his final days, and he wants to have one final great day with Bill where they get married and have a great dinner together. And it's funny how early in the episode we see Bill run behind Frank, and he's older than Frank as well, but for Frank that's how life is sometimes. Disease sneaks up on anybody, it doesn't matter age or fitness or anything like that. We see the montage of their last day, and the song in the background is on the nature of daylight, and this gets played a lot in many TV shows, many films. We saw This Bitter Earth as well in Shutter Island, which involves the vocals as well. It just really hits hard, even for me, with someone who has a cold dark heart, it still hits hard, that tune, and with the images on show as well going alongside it, I think for many people that would be where you tear up. There's a lot of subtleties of this episode, and one of my favourite ones involves Bill and Frank's first meal, where we see them sitting at either end of the table, whereas with this final meal, Bill moves closer to be right next to Frank. And also how he turns the plate for him. I love little things like that. And as Bill pours the pills into Frank's wine and he drinks that, we find out that Bill has also done the same by putting it into the bottle, and so they're both going to die together. And so with that comes the end of Bill and Frank's chapters, and we go back to Joel and Ellie, where they arrive at the house and see that the flowers are dead, and gives them an indication straight away that something's happened. They look around the house and Ellie finds a note from Bill and she reads it out to Joel, but when she gets to a part which mentions Tess, Joel stops her in her tracks because we don't talk about Tess. It was a really well written note, and it really echoes to Joel that he's been a failure when it comes to protecting people. And for those who are saying that this episode is a filler episode, just think about what it's been about in terms of Bill. Bill was a man who had nothing to live for but learns to love again, and who does that remind you of? Joel and Ellie take some time to gather supplies, have showers and change into some pretty iconic looks. And they both find something of use, with Joel finding the car battery in the fridge and Ellie finding a gun and stashing it into her bag. Joel's parenting side comes out as he helps her with a seatbelt, and Ellie plays a tape from Linda Ronstadt, and Joel asks her if she knows who that is, and it reminds me a little bit when my parents have asked me the same sort of question about some artists before, and I'm like, I have no idea, and they're like, oh, how can you not know who that is? What do they teach you in these schools?
What do they teach in schools these days?
The episode ends beautifully with Bill and Frank's bodies being in the bedroom. We just look out of the window which Bill opened before they died, and the episode then comes to a close. And I think with it was a very bittersweet one. It was a really well done story, but with these characters it was great to have them, but also sad to leave them behind as well. But this episode, it was a sidestep from the main story, there's no doubt about that. But with how they handled it, it was very enjoyable, and I think it was so different from the game, but for me it was a success, and for doing it in its third episode of the series, a brave decision as well. The trailer for next week's episode looks like it's going to be a busy one, quite jam-packed and full throttle, so I do look forward to that. But what did you think of this one, episode 3? Were you a fan of the changes they made, or did you think they should have kept more true to the game? But for now, if you want something else to watch, on screen is our review for the film Babylon.